Hey, JSHomecook, home cooking channel. Getting right into it today, we're making dehydrated tomatoes. So start out by getting your stock pot, fill it up with water, and also get yourself some or other type of vessel for your ice water bath. While that water's boiling, you'll prep up your tomatoes. Roma tomatoes are ideal, but any tomato will work. Other varieties are just a little bit messier. So prep your tomatoes, and it's very easy to do that. Just grab one, take your knife, and then score across the top of the tomato one way and then the other way. Simple as that. Try to not make the cut too deep. You don't want to go deep when you're scoring your tomatoes, but that's how you prep them, so just do that to all your tomatoes. Once you have a gentle bubble going on in your pot like that, my guess is that's like a latent 209, but once you have that gentle bubble, you can go ahead and start adding your tomatoes. And what you're doing here is blanching. You are blanching these tomatoes so that you can peel them easily. They won't need a very long time in the stock pot, about a minute to a minute and a half. And that'll just scald the exterior of the tomato and then make that peel easier to come off. You can come in, give them a little turn every once in a while. I like to do that. As far as your ice bath is concerned, I just called it that, but I just use cold tap water. I think it's sufficient. I've never really had a problem just using tap water. I think the ice bath is a little excessive, and yeah, I think it's unnecessary. So you just use cold tap water or an ice bath if you really want to. So my latent 209 came down to a 202. I would turn up the heat again a little bit. Again, you ideally would like to see a gentle bubble going on in the pot, not just steamy water. We want to blanch these tomatoes. We don't want to give them a schwitz, so make sure it's bubbling. And I'll tell you now, one of those tomatoes gave me difficulty in the peeling, and I think it probably was because the temp was too low. So we're pulling the tomatoes now, and if anyone is counting, that was like 68 seconds. And then you just throw them in your tap water bath there, and that'll be good enough to cool it down and stop the cooking process. One thing you can look for on your tomatoes, if you're not sure if they're done or not, is that little score that you do across the top. It'll actually like crack and then go down the sides of the tomato. You can kind of see it in the tomato at the top right there. You can see how the skin has sort of split down the side of it. And that'll be a pretty good indication that your tomato is pretty well done and ready to come out. I'm going to cut the video here though. I don't think you need to see it again. Pretty sure one time is enough for all of you. You're smart cookies. All four of you. Once your tomatoes have adequately cooled, you can move on to peeling them, and that's very simple. You just grab one of your scores and pull, and then a big old piece of skin comes off, just like that. And like I was saying before, you do want to make sure that your tomatoes are adequately blanched. If they aren't, this step will not be so easy. And in fact, like I was saying, I did encounter problems with one or two tomatoes because I didn't let them go long enough, and because the stock pot got too low in temperature. So, try and avoid that. So this footage here is actually shot after the first time I shot footage for this video. I'll explain more later, but right now pay attention to that red line there. You see that red line, and then you see how there isn't a red line there. Seems like the tomatoes usually have like 4 or 5 of those fusion lines. And where you cut on the tomato in relationship to those fusion lines impacts the way it opens up. Like you see, that wasn't an ideal cut if your goal was to expose the pulp of the tomato, which was my goal. And you see, so there's that line again. And this is what happens if you cut on that line. You see that? It doesn't expose the pulp at all, just kind of like the hard center mass of the tomato. So let's look again here. You see that? So there's the 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we're going to try and cut straight down there like that. And there's a bit of nuance to this, right? Like, I went one to the left of it. But you see that there? You see, if you're trying to expose the pulp, that's where you have to cut it. So we're going to look on this tomato now. And let's see. So looking at this tomato, you got a line there, there, there. And we're going to try and cut kind of like between the X, if that makes any sense. You see that? You see how that tomato has an X going? We're going to try and do the same on this one and cut like through the X, through the center of the X. Kind of like that. And when you do that, Boom. You see? We're going to do it again. Find the X and split it down the middle. Just like that. That's how you get the soft, pulpy part exposed. So do what you will with that information. It was just an interesting observation I'd made while in the process of filming this new footage for the video. And like I said, I'll explain now. So the reason that I'm filming it again is because the footage I got originally wasn't very good. My hand was always blocking the shots. And so, you know, how can I show you pulping these tomatoes if my hand's always blocking the shot? So that's why I'm redoing it. But hey, in the process, I learned something, so it worked out for me too. So if you're wondering if you have to pulp the tomatoes, I guess probably not, but in my experience, like I've tested this out, you get much better results if you get rid of that pulpy center because it just contains so much moisture. And so if I were you, yeah, I would pulp them. And you can see how I'm trying to do that here. So I run the knife through the fleshy center mass at the back and then also at the front. And then I take a spoon and I just kind of like spoon out the pulp. And so that's one method you can use to get the pulpy center out. But as you will eventually see, I learned that you actually don't want to expose the soft pulpy center. You want to expose the fleshy part of the center of the tomato. I just found that it was much easier pulping the ones that had the fleshy part exposed. And you'll see when I eventually get to one of them here just how much faster and easier it was. And you know, it's a little unfortunate that I went into this just assuming that exposing the soft part would be the easiest, because I had no reason to believe that, right? Like, why did I assume that? And then cut almost every single tomato that way. And for me, this just affirms that if you don't know something for a fact or don't have a good reason for believing in something, maybe you should question it instead of just assuming that, you know, you're right. Of course, with these tomatoes, the stakes are low, but imagine if I didn't have these couple of tomatoes with the fleshy part exposed, and then I never would have learned that, you know, you actually want the fleshy part exposed because it's faster, and I would have just taken like twice as long with the pulpy part exposed for the rest of my life. That's why you question things. This final tomato here is where like I really hit my stride and figured out how to do this extremely well and efficiently. So you see, that's one of the fleshy boys there. So cut it so the fleshy part's exposed, run the knife along the sides like that, and then watch when I come in with that spoon. It's oh, boop, didn't even need the spoon. Look at that. Amazing. That's how you want to do it, folks. Fleshy part exposed, run the knife along the sides. In the future, I'll film myself dehydrating tomatoes again just to see if this new sort of hypothesis holds true for other tomatoes. So once you've got your tomatoes peeled and gutted, arrange them onto some or other sort of tray. And you can see I'm using like this air fryer tray that I've got. And I set down this parchment. I actually did find the pieces that were sitting on the parchment came out better than the ones that were just sitting on the grid. So if you're using some sort of pan like this, definitely lay down some parchment. And this was just a test that I did for my own curiosities. So if you're wondering, yeah, that's why I did it two different ways. So get those tomatoes arranged on whatever tray you're using, and then we'll move on to the next step. That next step is salting the tomatoes. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. Just give them a nice light little salt. Remember, these are getting dehydrated, so if you add a lot of salt, they're going to be very salty. After your tomatoes are salted, you can put them into the oven. I'm using footage from both times because the first time I used the dehydrate setting, and then I thought not everybody has dehydrate setting on their oven, so I wanted to try just at the lowest temperature on the oven. And also, you know, being 100% honest, I don't use my big oven when I do this. I usually use my combi oven, which is like this fancy small oven that has precise temperature control. But again, you know, not everybody has something like that, so I wanted to try doing this with just my oven, conventional oven, lowest possible setting, and it still works. So, you know, if that's all you've got, you can still do this. So if lowest setting on your oven is like 170, 175, you can still do this. It'll come out just as good as if you were using a dehydrate setting. And this is the tomatoes getting pulled at about 2.5 hours. So again, you know, if you're just regular conventional oven, Maybe do it around 2 hour mark. And all I'm doing is taking them and flipping them. And here we are again, long and skinny for conventional oven at just the lowest possible setting. This is around the 2 hour mark. Doing the same thing again. Come in, give everything a flip, and check on it again in about an hour or so. And then when your tomatoes are looking something like this, you could probably go ahead and call that done. If you aren't sure, you can take a piece and, give it a little taste test, see if it's concentrated enough, but you can see what their texture and consistency is like here. For comparison, here's just a regular tomato. But yeah, these dehydrated tomatoes, they're good as they are, especially if they're just really high quality tomatoes. I probably wouldn't bother doing anything else to them if they were. But eventually I'll show you some footage here about something I like doing to them when, they're just tomatoes. So I did a little taste test there and determined that these were done. And this was after about 5 hours on the dehydrate setting. If you were using just conventional oven, 175, 170, you could probably pull them around 4 hours. But these tomatoes were just kind of okay tomatoes, so I wanted to enhance them. And the way I do that is by putting them in a dish like this. And you arrange one layer, and then I get some olive oil and I add a tiny bit of white wine vinegar or white balsamic to it, and then just come in with a little brush and brush that oil and vinegar onto the tomatoes, give them a nice little coat, and then sprinkle on any herb of your choosing. I'm just going with oregano. That's what I find to work best. It's one of my favorites. Basil would probably be really good too, but I like oregano, so sprinkle on a little bit of oregano, and then come in with a little bit of black pepper. And once I've completed that layer, I will arrange another layer of tomatoes and just repeat the process until I'm out of tomatoes. Then I put them in the fridge and use them for whatever I want. They really are versatile. I use them for sandwiches, burgers. I've used them to make focaccia, pizza. I've even used them as like a vegan sashimi sort of thing. They're a little sweet, savory, just an excellent thing to do with some extra tomatoes. I recommend you try it, but that's basically the video. That's it. So thanks for watching. I hope you give it a try. If you do, let me know how it goes. Hope to see you again. Bye for now.